Abigail got the job she had always wanted. Those all-nighters and early morning studies paid off. She was now officially a nurse. Abigail had a frail body as a child and had to be hospitalized most of the time. During her time in the hospital, she watched the nurses with their caps and pristine uniforms helping people. She watched nurses on night duty patrolling the ward and chatting and laughing when they had time. In short, she wanted to be a nurse ever since she was a kid. And now she was one. The hospital she worked in, Asha, was well-renowned. Almost all the kids born in GAM were born in this hospital. She was worried she wouldn't fit in, but after a week she was well adjusted. Abigail got through well, and soon she had her first night shift. And coffee's free. That was the news she wanted to hear. Seconds ticked by, and Abigail sat in the nurse's station boredly scrolling through her phone. Abigail reached out a hand to grab the paper cup and brought it to her lips. She paused and looked at the empty cup. Sighing, she got up to refill her cup. Seconds ticked by again. The paper cup was filled with brown liquid, and the new nurse took a sip. She sighed. Caffeine was the only thing keeping her alive. Out of the corner of her eyes, she saw a person walk by, a person with short brown hair and a white patient gown. "Excuse me?" She ran to the corner. "Hey." To her surprise, there was no one. Did any of the patients leave? Abigail rushed to the nurse's station to the surprise of the other nurse. "Abigail?" Lucy looked shocked. One of the patients left their room. Abigail almost shouted. At once the two nurses checked up on all the patients. "They're all in their rooms," Lucy said after checking the last of the patients. "Are you sure you are not seeing things?" "I am positive," Abigail argued. She felt stupid. It wouldn't hurt to check up on the guard. Dan was sleepy and was nodding off, so the two nurses caught him by surprise. "Anything wrong, Lucy?" He was an out-of-shape person. He looked over at the new nurse. "Haven't seen you around." "Abigail," the new nurse said hurriedly. Lucy placed a hand on her shoulder. "Calm down, Abigail," she said, then turned to the guard. "We saw a patient leaving their room. Can you check the CCTV cameras?" Dan nodded and turned to the screens. He clicked on the mouse several times and viewed all the footage. "Nope." Dan turned back to the nurses. No one left their rooms. "Are you sure?" Abigail pressured. "Yes, sister," Dan replied. "Are you sure you didn't have a little too much coffee?" That riled up the younger nurse. "I know what I saw." The guard just waved his hand. "I'll let you know if anything happens." "Thank you." Lucy nodded and turned to Abigail. "Let's go, Abigail." Abigail was still fuming as the two nurses made their way back to the nurse station. Then something struck her. "Why did you say we saw a person leave their room?" Lucy continued walking by her side. "I didn't want you to feel stupid." "Thank you," Abigail quietly mumbled. "I saw it too." "Huh? I saw it too." The new nurse stopped. "Then why didn't you say so?" "How about more coffee?" The older nurse pointed at the dimly lit cafeteria. "The good ones." They were back at the nurse station. "It was also my first night." Lucy began taking sips of her coffee. "I saw a person with short brown hair in a white patient gown." After embarrassing myself in front of the older nurses and the security guard, I was told that on the first night of every nurse, they saw the same person. "Do you think it was a spirit?" "If it is, then there are a lot of them in this hospital." "A lot. Seems like there is at least one in every section of the hospital." "Are they?" Abigail looked around, malevolent. Lucy laughed a bit. "God, I hope not." That was her first encounter. In her next transfer to the surgery ward, Abigail witnessed the harrowing monster that lurked there. On her first night, she saw a dark mass with multiple eyes moving on their own accord sitting on the shoulder of the front receptionist. She tried not to show it, but the uncanny look on the thing was enough to make Abigail stay away from that woman. The nurse watched the woman walk out of the building after her shift. The black thing remained. Abigail didn't know what happened to the woman, but she knew it was not good. More than half a year later, Abigail found herself helping out in the morgue. The rain had caused a heavy vehicle collision and many perished. After everything had been sorted out, she was allowed to leave. Then Abigail did something stupid. She turned around to look at the building. The ghost that inhabits the morgue was not even human. It was a large mass hovering over the building. The thing was not even black color. Abigail hasn't ever seen such color. The hue exuded death, sorrow, regret, and anger. Abigail quickened her pace and never looked back. The next day, she went back to the place to see that it no longer exists. Ghosts do move on. A few years later, Abigail found herself in the maternity ward. By then, Abigail was married and was trying to build a family with her husband. The ghost of the maternity ward was not a physical apparition, but was heard. On her first day, Abigail heard the cries of a baby. It was uncanny. Unfamiliar enough to not know, but familiar enough to attach it to the sound of an actual baby. It was night duty again. Abigail made her rounds as usual. The nurse touched her forehead and looked around. Her head was spinning, but as the other nurses ran, she knew what it was. Earthquake. People rushed around to protect the patients. Abigail turned and ran as fast as she could towards the room. All of a sudden there was a blackout and she fell on the ground. Abigail pushed herself. She crawled among the debris. Mentally pushing the pain away, she got up, and just as she did, the emergency lights came on. The nurse pushed herself and entered the room. Abigail was sure her legs and some of her ribs were smashed. She leaned against the wall looking at the infants' beds. Some had blood dripping down the sides. Just then the crying sounds came. Abigail shut her eyes, praying to God for help to arrive. Blood entered her eyes, and as she opened them, she saw them again. The strange color, the color of death. The baby's cries turned to the cries of a mother, which Abigail had no idea of. The nurse prayed with all her might for the ghost to go away. It's not even my first night. She couldn't even open her eyes, but she could hear the multiple slaps of flesh to the ground coming closer and closer to her. Abigail didn't hear the sounds of the rescue personnel rushing to her aid. It was dark. She was dead that she was clear of. Abigail looked up to see light and multiple people reaching out for her. She stretched out her hand and took theirs. It was warm, it was happy, and that was the place where she was supposed to be. Closing her eyes and sighing, she pulled herself up. But she couldn't move. Something was dragging her down. Abigail fought, but the light became dimmer and dimmer until she was engulfed in darkness. No. She couldn't even scream as a pair of hands dug into her eyes. The personnel pushed the boulders aside and stooped to look at the nurse. Abigail was drenched in blood, the blood of the babies. All around her were the remains and innards of the babies. But that was not what confused them. What confused them was the multiple child-sized handprints.